I'm delighted to welcome to the show today the very, very clever Mike Walton, who describes himself as an emotional baggage handler. So, Mike, over to you. What is an emotional baggage handler?
Well, good morning, Elaine, and thank you for inviting me on the show. An emotional baggage handler, I describe myself as that because what I do is I help people understand the weight of the emotional baggage that they're often pulling around. You know, the one where we have negative emotions, anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt, or the limiting beliefs such as I'm not good enough, I'll never have enough money, I can't get into a relationship, nobody likes me, and et al. Lots of things I'm sure that people can relate to if they think about it. And it's that emotional baggage that we actually carry unconsciously. So what I aim to do is help people understand just what that emotional baggage is, and particularly how it's preventing them achieving their goals and objectives. Continually, actually, very often. I mean, New Year's resolutions are a perfect example. You know, people do them every year, and every year they seem to fail. And that is because there is some form of emotional baggage which is holding them back.
Is there an age, Mike, in which you've seen a pattern of emotional baggage kind of accumulates through our lifetime, of course? So is there a kind of a starting point where it all kind of starts to become too much for people?
Well, yes, there is. And that's a very, very good question, actually, because what tends to happen in my experience is that the emotional baggage will, over a period of time, build. So we may start with one limiting belief, and the limiting beliefs then start to build. The interesting thing about the life, I help people not only understand the emotional baggage, but how to deal with it. And I use something called timeline therapy. And timeline therapy deals at an unconscious level. But we're always seeking the first event, looking at, for example, the timing. And the first event is almost always before the age of 7. And what happens is that a gestalt, which is a series of events, a series of emotional events, will build up in the unconscious mind. And initially, these things are kind of floating around with no particular hook to them, no particular label. And then eventually the unconscious mind will think to itself, well, I'm not comfortable with all these things floating around, so I will put them into a line, a gestalt. And I liken that to a string of pearls. And if you can imagine a string of pearls vertically, and the first pearl goes down the string where there's a knot at the bottom to prevent that pearl falling away, then subsequent pearls stack up behind it. And that's what's known as a gestalt. So the first event is very often before it's always before the age of 7 in point of fact, but it's stored unconsciously. And these unconscious gestalts, if you like, will build up over the years and as people get older, so they can become more evident and indeed more mentally debilitating with some people. And then we can tend to get aside from those limiting beliefs where anxiety can kick in as well. So the more that people feel they can't achieve something because they have a limiting belief about it, they then become a little bit more anxious about it. And I can, if you want me to, give you a story about exactly that, actually.
Please do, Mike. Go ahead.
Well, it's somebody we both know, but I'm not going to name her, although I do have permission to use her name generally, but I prefer not to on this type of media. But we in fact both know her. And she came to see me. She originally came to see me. She thought that hypnosis might help with her issues. But after I spoke to her for a good half an hour, it was quite obvious that there were other issues at an unconscious level. So we did some timeline therapy, and we released her negative emotions of anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt. But then she said to me, you know, I'm really very anxious. We go skiing every year. We've been going to Austria for the last 10 years. In fact, we love it that much that my husband and I got married there, and we've been going ever since. And I'm due to go next week. This was at the time, by the way, not this next week coming. She said, and I'm really anxious about an awful lot. I'm anxious about the journey from home to East Midlands Airport. I'm extremely anxious about the flight because I don't like flying. I'm anxious about the transfer at the destination airport to the destination hotel. I'm anxious about heights in ski lifts. I'm particularly anxious about my daughter and her avoiding having any accidents. And then I can reverse all of that because I'm anxious about the journey back from the destination hotel to the destination airport, the flight, and back to East Midlands Airport and home. And I went, phew. However, we dealt with each one of those individually. And 40 minutes later, she was completely clear and completely anxious-free. And I'll never forget, she came back from holiday, and as it happens, she and I were at a networking meeting in Derby. And at that particular type of meeting, there is what they call a 40-second slot, where everybody stands up and tells everybody else in the room about what they do and so on. And this lady stood up and she said, I'm not going to talk about me today. I'm going to talk about Mike Walton, because I've just had the most amazing holiday, completely anxiety-free. And I really can't believe what happened, what he did, but whatever it was, it worked. And that really is, that really emphasizes the actual power of the unconscious mind and what we could achieve if we broker access to that unconscious mind. Incredible stuff.
It is, and it's also sad that she spent so many years going on holiday with all this anxiety. So again, it's a more testament to the build up and build up and build up.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And also,
this comes back to your original question about lifespan, if you like, or is there a time through age? And yes, undoubtedly, in my opinion, there will be, because people keep building up and building up. And actually, what happens at an unconscious level is that we might say, I don't know, let's say that we've got an outside event which says, oh yeah, we're going to fly to Spain on holiday. It's, oh yeah, great, I'm looking forward to that very much. That then goes into numerous filters in our unconscious mind, and the unconscious will say, oh, hang on a minute, you don't like flying, remember that? And that comes out at the other end. You say, oh gosh, yeah. Oh God, that means I've got to fly. Oh dear, not again. So you get that build-up of, in this case, fear, stroke, anxiety. And the more those come, the more the unconscious mind will remind us of it. And it's identifying what those issues are at an unconscious level and then resolving.
In the first kind of preliminary conversation you had with this lady, she came to you seeking hypnotherapy help that she thought would be useful, and yet you went on through the conversation to identify that actually there's more underlying stuff. So it's really worth having a chat with, obviously yourself, but other practitioners as well, before engaging into full stream ahead, because that's a quick way really of identifying what the issues are and getting to them immediately, isn't it? Just by having
absolutely. 100%. When people come to see me, or indeed people who work in a similar way to me, almost always what they do is bring a presenting problem. But we're not interested in the presenting problem. What we're interested in is the root cause. It's the root cause that drives the presenting problem. The other interesting thing is when anybody comes to see me in the initial meeting, the first meeting, I'll sit them down and say, okay, how can I help you today? And they may say, for example, I'm depressed. My first question is, really? When did you decide that? Because they weren't born depressed. A decision was made, a limiting decision was made, which leads to whatever the presenting issues that they may label depression. Now, I'm not making light of depression, by the way. Depression can be very, very serious, and there are all kinds of different depressions which often need to be dealt with medically, which I'm not trained to do. I simply used that as an example. And whatever they come with, whatever the client comes with, let's say it's anxiety, or let's say it's a fear of heights, which is anxiety in another way. It's all back, really, when did you decide that? So we're looking for the root cause rather than necessarily the presenting problems that they think they're coming to resolve with me initially. Dealing with the root cause removes those symptoms that they bring in the first place. So it is absolutely, what you say is absolutely correct. And sometimes I might be asking questions for an hour before I get to a position where I'm recommending the action that we should take to help them resolve the issues that they have. Because they don't always know what the issue is. They think they know, but it's stored unconsciously. So for example, let me try and be a little bit more specific with the unconscious mind. There are prime directives of the unconscious mind. There are about 23 or 24, actually. But there are 8 which are very, very important and very relevant. And the first one is that it stores memories, both in relationship to time and not in relationship to time. It organizes all our memories, so it uses a timeline, which is the mechanics of the Gestalt that I referred to a little bit earlier. It represses memories with unresolved negative emotions. That's quite important. But it also presents repressed memories for resolution. And the final 2, which are important, one is that it runs the body. It has a blueprint of what the body is now and of perfect health, so of higher self. That's probably something you relate closely to with the work that you do. And finally, and probably most importantly, it preserves the body. It maintains the integrity of the body. So, for example, when we go to bed at night, we sleep. Some of us sleep for 8 hours. I do sometimes. But whatever period of time we sleep for, we wake up and everything's functioning okay. Our heart's ticking, our blood's circulating, we've been breathing, and every other bodily function, well, most of the bodily functions anyway. And all that's done unconsciously because we've been asleep. So that sort of illustrates some of the power of the unconscious mind. Bearing in mind also that the unconscious deals with 95% of what happens in our life. Only 5% of what we do is run through the conscious mind. That's primarily because there's too much information going on at any given time, and the conscious mind can't process it. If it tried to, it would probably go balmy.
You've just answered one of the questions I was going to ask you, which is more powerful, the unconscious or the conscious mind? And clearly it's the unconscious mind.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And having a dialogue with the unconscious mind and understanding what it's capable of is absolutely massive. Your unconscious is listening to me now. My unconscious will be listening to you. And talking to our unconscious mind can have significant effect, both positive and indeed negative. what we tell ourselves on a daily basis, hourly basis, even minute by minute, the unconscious will listen. And if we tell it something often enough, it'll probably take action and give it to us. So you can actually heal yourself physically and mentally using the unconscious mind. I've done it, so I know it works. And I think also what's very pertinent is that there is a direct relationship between physical pain and mental pain, or emotional pain is a better expression. So sometimes when I work with people, Elaine, when I'm doing timeline therapy, I'll say to them before I start, I'll say, oh, by the way, before we start, do you have any aches and pains? Anything troubling you physically? Oh, yes, they might say, I've got stiff shoulders or a stiff neck, or I've got a pain in my elbow or a pain in the foot, or whatever. I say, good, fine, thank you. Don't say any more. Then we'll do the timeline therapy, depending upon what we're working with, take about 45 minutes to an hour. And when we've cleared whatever it is we're looking to clear, I'll say, oh, by the way, how's the pain? And they'll look at me for a minute and they might shrug their shoulders or wiggle a finger or twist an ankle. And I say, do you know what? It's gone. Or actually, yes, what I forgot to say, by the way, is I would use the subjective unit of distress, which is the 0 to 10 level of pain, 0 being no pain at all, 10 being excruciating, and ask them if indeed it hasn't gone completely, whereabouts is it on the scale that they mentioned before we did that work, and it will almost always have reduced significantly, if not gone away. So that connection between the unconscious and the conscious is fundamental. And often pain's there for a reason anyway, but the unconscious will give us pain because it wants us to take action. So it might be to see a doctor, it might be to see a physiotherapist, a dentist, or whatever. Or it might simply be saying, I want you to deal with this emotional pain that you have, because until you do, you're going to get this physical pain. People with fibromyalgia, for example. Most people with fibromyalgia will have pain because they live life at 100 miles an hour. And the unconscious mind is not too keen on that. So unless they slow down, the unconscious will say, well, if you're not going to slow yourself down, I'll slow you down. And you give them some pain. So working with people in that way to get them to change the way their life is, the way they behave, if you like, in life, and slow right down, thinking about themselves first rather than everybody else, that actually can, if we get them to agree to do that, you can then work with their pain and you can actually certainly reduce the pain significantly, if not eliminate it completely. So there is that connection between emotional and physical pain, which is driven by the unconscious mind. And that comes back to the blueprint for the body and maintaining the integrity of the body. That's what the unconscious is doing.
So what we're saying is listening to our body is crucial, because Absolutely. If we can by listening to what our body is asking for, we can heal ourselves using the right approach. So how do you work out which approach is best for your clients that come to you? So you've mentioned the Gestalt timeline therapy. What other and hypnotherapy? So what other therapies are useful, and do you mix a kind of combination of all of them?
I usually mix a combination of all of them. Hypnosis per se is very, very powerful, and what I like about hypnosis is that you can actually use it as a mind massage tool. Now, many people, me included, like to go for a massage, a Swedish massage or a Thai massage, whatever. And often I'll say to people, do you go for a massage? Yes. Do you like that? Oh, yes. And what particular part of it do you like? Well, it's so relaxing. And, you know, when you have that massage, you will, based on my experience, certainly, you will actually become very relaxed, almost falling asleep. And that's the mind-body connection, because actually it's almost like hypnosis. So then I'll say to people, you know, given that there is a mind-body connection, have you ever thought about having a mind massage, which could be 40 or 45 minutes of just gentle hypnosis, which I also do. But hypnosis is thousands of years old. It's been used for generations. And looking at it as an overall therapy, it is the most successful of all therapies. So it says. That's not me saying it, that research says it. So hypnosis is very good. I enjoy hypnotizing people. Actually, I'm quite good at it and I enjoy doing it. I do use NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, as part of the questioning techniques. So as you've just said, excuse me, that it's a combination of those three, really, initially. I also use something called timeline therapy, thought field therapy, which is that tapping thing that Paul McKenna does on television sometimes. Although I haven't used that as much in recent years. And you and I have discussed before something that I used called Old Pain to Go, which is using the unconscious mind, or using the client's unconscious mind, to accept that the pain is not necessary. This is, by the way, providing they've had medical opinion, and in most cases with my clients, they've been told there's nothing more that can be done for their pain. So we get the unconscious mind to agree that the pain is unnecessary, and get it to remove the pain effectively. So I do that as well. I've done other bits and pieces, but I don't use them very much these days. Those are the key things that I use these days. And because as much as anything, I enjoy it. But when people are seeking therapy, whatever label you choose to put on it, whether it be CBT or EFT or some of the other therapies around, it still, in my opinion, comes back to what is the underlying cause. And the chances are, in my experience, is that there will be negative emotions or limiting beliefs in there somewhere. And if we can deal with those, then the others aren't as necessary. That doesn't mean to say the others don't work. I'm sure they do. But for me, getting to the fundamental underlying issue to an unconscious level and dealing with that, more often than not, will deal with the issues that the client has.
So there's so many different aspects to this, but all basically coming down to the power of our unconscious mind. That's the bottom line, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And you know, people ask me, what do you do? And actually, I'm going to change my position a little bit on it, because people really need to know a bit more about what I do. But recently, I've been saying, well, I help people fix their mind. I said I have a variety of integrated therapies, but the common denominator of all of those therapies is the unconscious mind. So whether it's therapies that I'm trained in and certified in, or whether it's some of the therapies that other people use, the unconscious mind will be playing a part in there somewhere. Certainly in mine, NLP, timeline therapy, which is a part of NLP, and hypnosis, are all working with the unconscious mind. And some of the others that I'm not certified in will be similar. So the common denominator for me is the unconscious mind. Yes, absolutely.
The limiting beliefs before the age of 7, that also is no coincidence with the behavioural profiling that I do. Some listeners will remember that I'm a specialist in the DISC model of behavioural profiling. And that also is linked to behaviour that we have in our early days. And the Jesuits have a saying, "Give me the boy until he's 7 and I will give you the man." So as you
Yep.
rightly say, all the psychologists agree on this point. They disagree on many things, but they agree on this point, that it's in our early years that the behaviours form, and our behaviours obviously affect our health and our career success, our whole life. And
Yep.
I have a very brief story of my limiting beliefs that I've only just realised. I'm be 63 in a couple of weeks, and I've only just realised that I had a limiting belief for most of my life about my ears. When I was younger, I remember saying to my nan that my ears stick out. And so she said, "Oh, don't worry about it, dear. When you're reading a book, put your elbows on the table, put your hands over your ears and push them back, so that you're kind of training your ears to go back while you're reading a book." So for years and years, I actually read books like that, literally years. And
Yeah.
it was when I had a spot of chemotherapy a few years ago, and I was told I'd lose my hair. I didn't, and I asked my son to shave it off in advance so that I was in control of the situation. So I ended
Yeah.
up with a bald head. And I was wearing all these, scarves and different hats and things to cover up. And then one day I thought, actually, they're not too bad at all. So ever since then, I've changed my hairstyle, and it's much, much shorter. And now people see my ears every day, and I wear
Yeah.
fancy
Absolutely.
earrings and all sorts. And that's taken me 50 odd years to get to that point. How ridiculous is that?
And that's a good story, and it is quite interesting. I think it was Carl Jung that came up with the 3 7-year periods, wasn't it? With the example he gave of the Jesuits giving the child until he's 7, and I'll give you the man. Children don't do logic in their first 7 years, and they're what's known as the imprint years. And then 7 to 14 are the modelling years. That's when we model others, our parents, possibly peers or whatever. And 14 to 21 are the socializing years. And I'm reasonably sure it was Carl Jung that came up with those 3 7-year periods. But interestingly, when we're looking for the root cause with timeline therapy, which I say will always be before the age of 7, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But we're looking for the first event. And what we're saying is, when was the first event of, if you were to know, was it before, during, or after your birth? If they say before, we say, was it a past life or genealogical? Now, it doesn't matter what they say in point of fact. If they say it's past life, we ask how many lifetimes ago. If it's they say it's genealogical, we ask how many families ago, so to speak. So we're only interested in what the unconscious says, but the unconscious stores it there. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just whatever the unconscious says, because we're getting the unconscious to deal with it. Now, let me just give you another example of how that works. I might be working with somebody and I say, well, when was the first event? If you were to know, what age were you? And I will already have asked my client, or told my client, that it would be before the age of 7. So they'll say, oh, I was 10. So no, before that. So they'll have another thing. They say, no, I can't think. I don't know of anything before the age of 10. The answer to that will be, yes, I know you don't know consciously, but your unconscious knows. Ask your unconscious. Give me the first number that comes into your head. And they will always come up with something between or before the age of 7, within that, before, during, or after your birth. Sometimes it's in the womb. Occasionally it's during birth. So I'm not interested, or people like me who are trained in timeline therapy, not interested in specifically when, where. They just want that number from the unconscious mind. We can then deal with it, because timeline therapy is active imagination, working on a timeline, which we all have.
You mentioned past life. That sounds a bit woo-woo and fluffy. Explain a bit more about past life. How would we know about that? I know you're going to come back straight away and go, well, it's not us knowing, it's the subconscious or the unconscious. But can you explain a bit more about past life?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm actually trained in past life regression. And a lot of people have an interest in past life. A lot of people believe that they have lived before. So I can use a process in hypnosis which will allow them to potentially experience a past life. Interestingly, also, a guy that did my training, who is a hypnotherapist, he lives in Norway now, but he was based in Beverly, a fellow called Steve Burgess. He's written 2 books on past life. And Steve said to me one occasion, in excess of 80% of his clients, he uses past life regression therapy. So what he does is, let's say somebody comes to see him with a pain in the shoulder, like an arthritic pain, for example. He will take them into a past life using past life regression techniques, which is hypnotic. And they may be, or may have been, a soldier in the days of Robin Hood in this past life. And they're shot with an arrow in the shoulder. Dealing with that event in hypnosis in past life, by removing that arrow, taking that pain away, then they're coming out of that past life and bringing them out of hypnosis, actually will, so he tells me, get rid of the pain that they've come to see him about, for example. Now, you might say to me, do you believe in past lives? What I will say, it doesn't matter whether I believe it or not. What is important is that I have a mechanism that allows people who are interested and believe they've lived before to experience it. The interesting thing, and part of the skill here, because you're talking to people when they're in hypnosis, if they're in a past life. So let's say somebody says you might say, well, where are you? So, well, I'm on Lord Nelson's ship, and we're sailing across to France. So I might say, really, and the ship that you're on, what's it made of? And they may turn around, well, of course, it's like any other ship, it's a steel hull. Now, that means that they're not in a past life, because Nelson's boat didn't have steel hulls. And what can happen is that they might have read a book, for example. You just gave that example of reading when you were younger, when your nan helped you out with that little limiting belief you had. And we might have read a book, and whatever's in that book, it was actually, we don't remember it. I read a lot of books when I was younger. I don't remember them particularly. But certain things from that book stay in the unconscious mind. And when we relax people with hypnosis, that can come forward from the unconscious. So they relate that and think that it's possibly a past life. So really all I do with past life regression is provide a vehicle for people to experience what they believe is a past life. In the context of timeline therapy, I'm not interested in the past life per se. We're simply asking the unconscious mind, was the first event genealogical past life before, during, or after your birth? Whatever they say, if they say it was after your birth, say if it's after your birth, what age were you? If you were to know, what age were you? So you take it from there, and then you move on to the process itself. So in timeline therapy, we're less interested in regression. But and I have hypnotized over 30 people in one room using the past life regression script. And some people say they've experienced a past life. But it's a very personal thing. As I say, whether you believe it or not is entirely up to the individual. But if people are sufficiently interested, I can certainly help them go on a journey. I remember we had an apartment in Spain for a number of years, and I worked with a young lady down there, and she had 7 past lives. And we went through each past life in order. Interesting. I can't just remember now what each past life was, but yeah, it's really interesting, because what you're doing, through the relaxation, and if people are good at relaxing, they're very suggestible, then the unconscious mind will come much more to the fore, as it were, quite easily. And some of the stuff that's stored there, whether it's a past life or whether it's stuff that's in the imagination, doesn't matter. If that makes the client feel comfortable that they've achieved that past life, then that's great. For whatever the outcome, whether it be purely therapeutic and curiosity, or whether it actually helps them get rid of something, in the case of the arthritic shoulder that I mentioned before.
It is very fascinating, Mike. Thank you for explaining all of that. So how did you come to this in the first place, talking about past lives? Tell us a bit about your past life before you woke up to all this wonderful stuff.
Well, I'm relatively new to it. I've been doing it for 13 years this year. My background is sales, marketing. I worked for 3 blue chip companies in various different roles, various different industries, actually. And I was the third of which was Fison's Horticulture, the manufacturers of Levington composts, which many of your listeners will be aware of, I imagine. And in 1994, redundancy reared its ugly head. Now, I was very, very fortunate because my boss and the HR manager, or in those days, the personnel manager, as they were called, labeled, were both relatively good pals. And they said, look, we've had a management buyout, there will be a restructuring, and we've every reason to believe that you, i.e. me, and my boss would be casualties of that reorganization. So that enabled me to have a bit of a look round and think to myself, well, what am I going to do now? And I've been working with a training company. I've been using them to train. At that point, I was national sales manager. I got 35 salespeople responsible to me. So I rang this guy up and explained to him what had happened. He said, well, that's very interesting and quite convenient because we will be looking for a new tutor. Would you like to come and join us? So I did. I set up my own company because they wouldn't employ me. And I did that for, I don't know, 10, 12, 13 years or so. Very successfully. Enjoyed it. Good revenue stream. But then training changed, and the days of the classroom training, which the type of stuff we did, really had its day, came to the end of its lifetime. So I did 1 or 2 other bits and pieces, and then I'd always been very, very interested in what motivates people to behave in the way they do. And I've always been a very big people watcher. So in 2006, I thought, well, I better do something about it. So I enrolled on a basic NLP practitioner course, 7-day course. And it just blew me away, to be honest. So quickly, I enrolled with the same company as a master practitioner. And then in October of that year, I went out to Australia to certify as a trainer of NLP, of hypnotherapy, and of timeline therapy. And I was very, very lucky to do it with Tad and Adriana James, Tad James being the creator of timeline therapy. It was based on the work of Richard Bandler and John Grinder in NLP. And I fully intended to run courses to certify people in those disciplines. But I made one very big mistake. I got a very, very super duper, all singing, all dancing website, which cost me an arm and a leg, although I think I was ripped off, but that's another story. But I didn't market it properly, and I found myself in a situation where I wasn't getting any clients. I thought, well, this isn't really quite how I saw the future. So I started going networking back in 2010. And people would come up to me and say, oh, this is very interesting. Can I come and see you? So I thought, well, yeah, by all means. So I kind of fell into therapy. Stopped smoking, weight loss, which I still specialize in. In fact, I fit virtual gastric bands. Then I did more personal development on hypnosis because I found, A, I enjoyed doing it, and B, that I was pretty good at it. And that really is the kind of story of my latter life, particularly, and I still enjoy doing it. It helps me keep the old grey matter in place. I enjoy helping people, and given the results that come from some of the therapies I use, it's extremely rewarding to see the change in people and see what they've been able to achieve as a result of working with me. And that's really got me to where I am today, to be honest. I don't work 5 days a week necessarily, or I will do if people want me to. It's just a question of helping people. And I thoroughly enjoy it. I meet nice people like you.
Fabulous. How do people contact you, Mike, if they'd like to get in touch to have a chat with you to see if you can help them? Well,
they can help them. They can use the usual medium. I have a website, which is www.mhwalton.com. There are full contact details on the website, but I also have an email address, which is mike@mhwalton.com. And my mobile number is on my website, so they can give me a call. They can email me, preferably give me a call, actually, because then we can have an initial free of charge chat. And then I usually invite people along for a second chat, and we can then hopefully understand what it is they would like to work with.
Excellent. So that's mhwalton.com.
That's the website.
Cool. So I asked visitors on the show to select 2 songs. You've chosen Dance the Night Away by the Mavericks and The Power of Love by Jennifer Rush. So tell us why you chose those 2 songs.
Well, Dance the Night Away with the Mavericks, it was, and I'm going back probably now about 22 years, when we lived in another house, actually. And I really got hooked on that song. And every now and then we would have small dinner parties for perhaps 4 or 6 people. And usually after dinner, as you do, we'd put some music on. And almost inevitably, that piece of music would be put on. Next morning, our daughter, Sally, would say to me, "I reckon Dad must have had a few glasses of wine last night, because the Mavericks were on at full volume, dancing the night away." So that was that one. So far as Jennifer Rush is concerned, and The Power of Love, I think that was first released in about 1977, because I'm a 60s child, or was. But really, when I saw that request on the admin stuff that we did before we went live, it was the first song that came from the unconscious. So I thought, well, I'm not going to try and find an alternative. The unconscious wants to hear that for some reason, or it's chosen it for some reason, more particularly. So there it is. It was an unconscious choice that decided to present itself consciously. You know, if I sat down and started thinking about some of the all-time favorites consciously, I'd be picking up things like Bruce Springsteen, or maybe some of the stuff back in the 60s. I mean, I like a lot of music, actually, a range of pop music, classical music. One of my absolute favorites is the New Year's Day concert from Vienna. So I have a range of things. I've seen a lot of people live, but those 2 stuck particularly in my mind from the unconscious, and that really is why I chose them.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon, Mike. It's been a real pleasure talking with you, and I'm sure listeners would have learnt an awful lot about themselves, and perhaps be asking themselves and their own unconscious, delving into that in the future. So thank you very much. mhwalton.com, listeners.
That's me. Thank you very much indeed for having me. And you know me well enough to know that I enjoy talking, inevitably, sometimes too long and too much. But it's been an absolute delight, Elaine. Thank you very, very much for having me. And I hope the listeners have enjoyed it and that they find something useful from it. If they want to know more about me, as you rightly say, just ask them to get in touch.
Fantastic. And here are your songs, Mike. Have a fantastic day, everybody. Whatever you're doing in the coming week, don't forget we'll be live next week at 4:00 on Tuesday, or Perfect Health on Elastic FM with Elaine Godley. So have a fantastic week and take care, be happy and be healthy.